Hey guys, thanks for joining me for another story time. Today we are going to be talking all about Groundhog's Day. Now, according to legend, groundhogs can predict the arrival of spring. So, we have dedicated a day, February 2nd, to groundhogs and them predicting whether spring will be early or late, and we call it Groundhog's Day. So, there's a famous groundhog named Punxsutawney Phil, and he wakes up on February 2nd and comes out of his den, and if he sees his shadow, he will go back into his den for 6 more weeks of winter. And if he does not see his shadow, then spring will come early. So, we are going to read today, Will Spring Be Early or Will Spring Be Late by Crockett Johnson. Before we do that though, do you all think the groundhog will see his shadow on February 2nd or not? Do you want 6 more weeks of winter, or are you ready for some warm weather? I'm definitely ready for some warm weather. It was the second morning of February. The woods and the fields were covered with snow. The wind blew from a cold gray sky. "This is the day," said a voice from under the ground. "This is the day I make my prediction. Will spring be early or will spring be late?" The voice came from a hole in the middle of the field. It was the groundhog coming up out of his tunnel talking to himself. "If I don't see my shadow, spring will be early. I can go right out and spread the glad tidings." The groundhog's nose came up in the hole, pausing there. "But if I do see my shadow, I'll go back in my tunnel. It will mean bad news. Spring will be late." The groundhog shivered. "How nice it is that I am expected to stay out only when I have good news," he said as he raised himself up onto his front paws. "Nobody wants to hear of a late spring." He looked at the gray sky. "No shadows today. Spring will be early." He hopped out of the hole. "I must tell the animals. It will please them all, even the grouchy pig who sneers at my predictions." He started off and stopped. "Wait," he said. "Spring's an important matter. I must be certain there is no sun. I must make sure I have no shadow." He tried to smell the sun. He raised his ears and listened for it, but all he smelled or heard was a truck on the road at the edge of the field. The road was beyond the end of the groundhog's world. He paid no attention to the truck or to the words on it that read "Artificial Flower Company." As the truck rounded a bend in the road, a red flower flew from it. The flower sailed high across the field on the wintry wind. "No sun and no shadow," the groundhog was saying to himself as he examined the snow at his feet. "Definitely an early spring." Smiling, he set off toward the woods where most of the animals slept during the cold winter. "How delighted they will be when I tell them," he said. "My prediction will spread joy throughout the land." And he hopped along happily, humming a spring song. Suddenly he stopped. There with its stem in the snow was a bright red flower in full bloom. The groundhog stared at it. His eyes grew wide and his mouth opened. "Spring?" he whispered. Then he shouted, "Spring! It's here now!" He broke into a run. "I never have made a better prediction than this. Even the pig will congratulate me," he yelled through the woods. "Spring is here!" he shouted. "Spring?" said the badger. "The groundhog said so," the dormouse cried, dancing around in the snow. So he thinks because he found that fake flower that spring is already there. Now he's telling everybody. "Spring?" said the skunk. "Is it really spring?" "The groundhog said so," said the rabbit, hopping with joy and skidding on a patch of ice. The squirrel stuffed the last of his acorns into his mouth. With a carefree cheer, he jumped from his hollow tree and landed in a snowdrift. "Spring!" yelled the chipmunk. "Thanks to the groundhog, the good predictor," cheered the raccoon, holding out a paw as the groundhog ran by. "Spring is here!" the groundhog kept shouting in a voice that was becoming rather hoarse. "I predict spring is here now." He ran on to the bear's cave. Ooh. When the bear woke up and heard what the groundhog was saying, he roared with delight. "Groundhog, you do better every year! Spring, spring in February, splendid! What would we do without you?" "I don't know," said the groundhog, swelling up his chest as he ran off. At last he came to the pig. The shouting and cheering had waked the pig, and now he was grumpily rooting under a tree stump for breakfast. "Spring, spring, it is here!" the groundhog shouted loudly in the pig's ear. "Humph," said the pig. "Spring," said the groundhog. With his mouth full of frozen roots, the pig turned around and glared at the groundhog. "Look," he said, snorting and thrusting his snout toward the windswept field. "Snow, ice. It's spring," said the groundhog, suddenly shivering. "Go away," said the pig, and he went back to his rooting. The groundhog went back to the other animals. "Spring really is here," he said. "Come, let me show you." "Of course spring is here," said the rabbit. "You said so." "And you are always right," the bear said. "If you were not, we would not believe you." "Come," said the groundhog. The animals followed him to the field where they saw the red flower in full bloom. It was more than they needed to see. They danced in a circle around it and shouted in praise of spring and of the groundhog. The pigs stopped rooting for breakfast and came over to see what was going on. The happy animals watched him as he trotted up to the red flower. "You see," the groundhog said, "spring is here." "Harumph," said the pig, staring at the flower. Then he rooted it up out of the snow, took it in his mouth, and chomped on it. He tossed the flower aside. "The leaves are paper, the stem is wire, the petals are plastic," he said, "and a lot of you will freeze out here." As he left, he glanced at the sky and at the groundhog. "I have a prediction to make," he said. "It's going to snow." It began to snow. Uh-oh. Was the groundhog wrong? Shivering, the animals looked at the twisted flower, and they looked at one another. The groundhog began to creep quietly away. "Just a moment," bellowed the bear. "There is some explaining to be done. Who is the cause of this? Why are we out here in a freezing snowstorm?" "We were celebrating spring," said the chipmunk. "We were all so happy," the Dormouse said, "until the pig came and chewed the flour." "Precisely," shouted the Bear, "and now we're cold and miserable and ridiculous. It's perfectly clear who's to blame." The animals all nodded. They blamed the pig, of course, and on the second morning of every February, the groundhog continues to make his prediction. Will spring be early or will spring be late? The end. So, the groundhog was wrong on that one, wasn't he? Alright, so before we get started on our next book, we're going to do our letters of the week. And I forgot to do them last week, so we're going to catch up. So, our first letter of the week is the letter T. The letter T for tiger. And this is what your T is going to look like after you get it all colored. Alright, and next up we have the letter U. So T and then U. The letter U for unicorn. And that is what that is going to look like after you finish it up. Alright, so the next book we have is the 10 Grouchy Groundhogs. 10 grouchy groundhogs crowded in their den. They squirmed and they stretched. And then, one grouchy groundhog announced with a shout, "This den is too small. Let me out, out, out." 9 grubby groundhogs working in their den. They clawed and they dug. And then, one grubby groundhog announced with a shout, "I gotta have a bath. Let me out, out, out." 8 graceful groundhogs dancing in their den. They swooped and they swirled, and then, one graceful groundhog announced with a shout, "Dancing makes me dizzy. Let me out, out, out." 7 gabby groundhogs chatting in their den. They gibbered and they jabbered, and then, one gabby groundhog announced with a shout, "Give me peace and quiet. Let me out, out, out." 6 goofy groundhogs tumbling in their den. They rolled and they romped, and then, one goofy groundhog announced with a shout, "I'm too tired from tumbling. Let me out, out, out." 5 groovy groundhogs singing in their den. They hummed and they strummed, and then, one groovy groundhog announced with a shout, "Hey, I'm a rock star. Let me out, out, out." 4 gobbling groundhogs dining in their den. They chomped and they chewed, and then, one gobbling groundhog announced with a shout, "I have a toothache. Let me out, out, out." 3 glitzy groundhogs grooming in their den. They primped and they puffed, and then, one glitzy groundhog announced with a shout, "Powder makes me sneeze. Let me out, 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 choo!" 2 giggly groundhogs running round their den, sliding down the tunnels, and then, one giggly groundhog announced with a shout, "Winter might be over. Let me out, out, out." 1 grumpy groundhog wondered with a pout, "Where are all my friends? Time to go find out." When one grumpy groundhog glanced outside his den, he counted all the groundhogs, not 1 or 2, but 10. 10 timid groundhogs looked around and then, startled by their shadows, dived back down again. 10 grinning groundhogs, grouchy no more, snug in their den, snore, snore, snore. Good night, groundhogs. So they went out and saw their shadows and said 6 more weeks of winter. So they went back into their dens. Alright guys, so for our craft this week, you are going to get a piece of paper that has a groundhog on it. And you can color it however you want and then cut it out. And you're going to get a piece of black construction paper. And you're going to tape your groundhog onto it by its feet. Not its head, just its feet. Alright, and after you tape it down, you're going to color all around it with a white crayon. So it's going to look like this. Alright, and then you can lift the groundhog up and you can see his shadow. Look at that. So you made the groundhog's shadow. How cool is that? Alright guys, another fun thing you can do to play around with shadows is turn off all the lights and get a flashlight and make shadow puppets on the walls. I would show you right now, but it's too bright out. So you will have to show me yours when you try it. Take pictures and send them in so I can see them. I hope you all enjoyed this story time, and I will see you next week.